White privilege, or white skin privilege, is a term for societal privileges that benefit people identified as white in Western countries beyond what is commonly experienced by non white people under the same social, political, or economic circumstances. Academic perspectives, such as critical race theory and whiteness studies, use the concept of white privilege to analyze how racism and racialized societies affect the lives of white or white-skinned people. The idea of the invisibility of privilege was first considered by Peggy McIntosh, who presented the idea that whites in Western society enjoy advantages that non-whites do not experience, as an invisible package of unearned assets. So, white privilege denotes both obvious and less obvious passive advantages that white people may not recognize they have, which distinguishes it from overt bias or prejudice. These include cultural affirmations of one's own worth, presumed greater social status, and freedom to move, buy, work, play, and speak freely. The effects can be seen in professional, educational, and personal contexts. The concept of white privilege also implies the right to assume the universality of one's own experiences, marking others as different or exceptional, while perceiving oneself as normal. And there is also the concept of maleness as the norm, that the starting point is male, and that women are something less than or defective in that they don't have the same characteristics. Heterosexuality is a norm, too. The concept of romance generally revolves around a heteronormative depiction of romance between a man and a woman. Our society is one that is stratified, meaning that groups of people are ranked in a social order, and that this ranking of entire groups of people perpetuates unequal rewards and life chances. Our society allows for social mobility in that we're not a caste society. A society that allows for social mobility allows its members to move up and down on the social order. In contrast to that is a caste society, where members are born into a caste and can never move into another social class. Ascribed status is referring to a social identity or position that we obtain at birth or develop into involuntarily as we get older. Race, sex, ethnicity, religion, and family status, that is, the identity of someone's child or grandchild, are all usually considered ascribed statuses. In a caste society, our ascribed status stays with us our entire life. Achieved status is referring to a social position or identity we take on voluntarily or earn through our own efforts or accomplishments, like being a student, an entrepreneur, a spouse, or a sociologist. So the idea of a society that allows social mobility, your social class is determined in part by your achieved status. There are various theoretical paradigms, and that means ways of thinking and constructing theories, about why inequality exists. The three sociological paradigms that researchers use are structural functionalism, conflict, and social construction. We've talked quite a bit about social construction already, but I want to talk very briefly about structural functionalism and conflict theory paradigms. Structural functionalism is a way of thinking about society as a complex system, composed of various parts, much like a living organism. Just as the heart, the lungs, and the liver work together to keep an animal alive, so do all the elements of a society structure work together to keep society alive. The conflict perspective views the structure of society as a source of inequality, which always benefits some groups at the expense of other groups. Social inequality is neither a necessity nor a source of social order. Instead, it's a reflection of the unequal distribution of power in society, and it's a primary source of conflict, coercion, and unhappiness. And, of course, the social construction paradigm is useful for us because it helps us to understand that class distinctions and categories of differences are socially constructed. Finally, I want to talk about the important concept of cultural capital. Racial, gender, class, and sexual differences and similarities are all enormously powerful predictors of life chances and access to important social resources. Sociologists use the term cultural capital to refer to the status characteristics that can determine a person's social opportunities. For instance, many top universities reserve a certain amount of positions for legacy applicants, whose parents are alumni of that institution. Family name, in this case, can serve as a form of cultural capital. In a society that values physical appearance, beauty is also cultural capital that can be exchanged for economic advantage. Research indicates that attractive people are assumed to possess other positive qualities, such as a pleasing personality, high intelligence, and success in interpersonal relationships. And membership in an advantaged gender, ethno-racial, and sexuality-based group can serve as cultural capital as well. As illustrated by the historical preference for white, male, heterosexual employees over women, people of color, and homosexual or transgendered individuals. Cultural capital can also provide advantage in the form of access to social connections and networks. So in closing, I think it's useful to consider one's own cultural capital. So I'm going to refer to myself here in order to create a bit of a framework of reference. I'm a female, white, heterosexual, cisgendered individual. I also happen to be Jewish, or at least I was raised that way, and am familiar with the cultures and traditions of Judaism. So amongst the many categories of differences, I'm a majority group member. I'm white, I don't identify as gay or lesbian, and I identify with the gender that I was assigned at birth, meaning the one I was born with. But for a couple of the other statuses, I'm a minority group member. I'm female, so there are certain disadvantages that I have. To some extent, I may have been passed over in the workplace because I don't fit into the good old boys network. I feel somewhat estranged at work when there are Christmas celebrations, or even when I'm given half a day off on Good Friday. I was born into an upper middle class family, and I have known since about high school that I had advantage and privilege associated with that at birth. But what is probably the most important aspect of my identity, that I'm white, is something that I never really examined. I was not aware of my race until I started teaching this course. I was not aware of my own privilege until I started teaching about it. In many ways, I was subjected to the invisibility of whiteness, my own unexamined racial identity, because I was part of the majority group. So, in ending this chapter, which contained much more information than the average chapter we will cover, I want you to think about the status characteristics that you inherited from your family and your birth. You might want to think about how that increased or decreased your opportunities in life relative to the rest of the population. What kinds of privileges did you enjoy? In housing, school, vacations, extracurricular activities, or life planning, such as your plans to go to college.